Good evening. Happy Wednesday. My name is Jenny Castleman, and I am the Deputy Director for the Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation. And we want to thank each of you for joining us today. Nevada is proud to join 11 other states in creating a respectful and open world for natural hair as a result of Senate Bill 327, sponsored by Senator Dina Neal and Senator Dallas Harris in Nevada's 81st legislative session. This legislation provides legal protection for Nevadans based on their natural hairstyles and creates the opportunity for our communities to welcome all forms of natural hairstyles in the places we work and learn together. Today, we are privileged to hear from our esteemed panel about why this legislation is so important to Nevadans and how it helps to create and support an inclusive workplace and learning environment. Moderating the panel tonight will be Kara Jenkins. Kara is the administrator for the Nevada Equal Rights Commission that oversees complaints of discrimination for Nevadans. Without further ado, I will turn this over to Kara.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And what a day. It is World Afro Day, and it's also Hispanic Heritage Month. And so what a great evening. Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Hopefully you've come off work and you're relaxed and you're tuning in because we've got some very good information for you tonight with an amazing panel. And without hesitation, I'm going to read briefly their bios and go over kind of what we're going to talk about today. But first, some logistical items. On your Zoom, go to the top right hand of your corner under View and make sure you select Gallery so you can see all of the panelists who are participating today, okay? And also, if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will see a Q&A button. Please feel free to type in your questions because we will be in real time answering those questions for you and reading them out loud so the panel can discuss any questions you may have about what the C.R.O.W.N Act is. And let's start with what it means. C.R.O.W.N stands for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. So let's get into it. But first, I want you to meet the panelists, starting with none other than Honorable Senator Dina Neal. Senator Dina Neal is the bill's sponsor for SB 327, now known as Nevada's version of the C.R.O.W.N Act, again, creating a respectful and open world for natural hair. Signed by Governor Sisolak on June 4th, 2021, Nevada is now the 12th state to offer protections to Nevadans in employment and schools based on hair texture attributed to African ancestry. Before elected to her Senate seat in November, Senator Neal was an assemblywoman for District 4. Senator Neal is also a member of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. She is a professor at Nevada State College, and she earned her law degree at Southern University School of Law. Please, everybody welcome virtually Senator Dina Neal. Next, we have none other than Nevada's own pride. We have Juliana Urtubey. She's amazing, and she made recent history after she became the first Latinx to be named National Teacher of the Year since 1992, everybody, since 1992. She is also the first educator from Nevada, that's right, virtual claps, to win the award, and she told Education Week that she is only the third special educator to receive the national honor. Ms. Urtubey has been a teacher for over 11 years and currently works at Booker Senior Innovative Elementary School. Shout out to Booker, teaching kindergarten through 5th grade. She also works as an instructional strategist for the schools, crafting individualized lessons to match the needs for her students. So we are so happy and honored to have our very own National Teacher of the Year, Ms. Juliana Urtubey, to participate in this very, very groundbreaking discussion. Welcome. Next, we have someone who is very special to me. She is the woman, the law expert for all things C.R.O.W.N. I'm talking about Professor D. Wendy Green of Drexel University Thomas R. Klein School of Law. She is an internationally recognized U.S. anti-discrimination law and race scholar whose work explores how constructions of identity inform and constrain the scope of civil rights laws. In so doing, Professor Green is a legal expert and an advisor for federal, state, and municipal level C.R.O.W.N. acts. and similar civil rights legislation, including SB 327, alongside serving as the legal expert in groundbreaking civil rights cases. And she also uses her expertise in challenging race-based natural hair discrimination in workplace and educational context challenges. So what that means, everybody, is that when everybody has a question about hair and race-based challenges with hair, we go to Professor Green. So everybody, please welcome Professor Wendy Green. Next, in the red tie, we have none other than Mr. Cedric Cole. He serves as the executive manager for the Office of Diversity and Affirmative Action, ADA, Title IX programs for the Clark County School District. In that role, Cedric and his team, they are responsible for investigating and resolving internal and external complaints of discrimination, facilitating reasonable accommodations for disabled or medically challenged or fragile employees, and for CCSD's overall compliance with state and federal anti-discrimination laws. I also have to say, Cedric used to be an investigator here at NERC. We're very proud of him and his success, and we know we're going to get great things from his participation in this conversation. Thank you, Cedric, and welcome.
Thank you.
Next, we have Naika Belizaire. She is a senior at Advanced Technologies Academy as a legal studies major. She is also a youth justice leader with Code Switch, Restorative Justice for Girls. She is an aspiring attorney with a focus on equity for the African-American community and other marginalized people. Her current activism is focused on creating safe spaces for people of color at home, at school, and at work, as well as implementing Black history education in schools throughout Nevada. Everybody, a young rising star in the making, we have Miss Naika Belizaire. All right, now that we know everybody on our panel, I want to kind of just talk about how we're going to do this. So we've got everybody here. We want to discuss fully the bill. Oh, we see hands clapping in the chats. We love hands clapping. Thank you so much. It's just so hard because we're not together, but we are. So we appreciate that. Thank you, City of Henderson, for the applause. We're going to have Senator Neal talk about key provisions of the bill that she wants all of us to pay special attention to, and then we'll go into a full panel. Again, get those questions, and I see the chats lighting up. Professor Green and I are taking a look at them, and we will open it up for a dialogue. I also have some questions as well, but now we're going to kick it off to Senator Neal to talk about the C.R.O.W.N. Act. Senator Neal?
Okay, good evening, everyone. Super happy to be here. Thank you for, number one, hosting this panel, NERC, and trying to educate the community on SB 327. It is most needed. This is one of the better bills that came out of the session. Senator Dallas Harris also co-sponsored this bill. And part of the reason why we wanted to bring this bill forward is because we both had experienced, I guess you could say, criticism over our natural hair, not necessarily discrimination, but specifically being told that wearing braided hair, Senator Harris actually has locks, but me, as wearing braided hair, I was told in 2013 in my second session that wearing braids was unprofessional and that it was not the appropriate look for a legislator. And it was quite interesting to have that response told to me, because I was the only African-American that had ever served on the assembly side. So it's not like there had actually been a Black woman before me. And so being told that my hair, that me wearing braids in the snow was unprofessional, I really took offense to that. Then I took it to heart. And so when I got the opportunity to move SB 327, I jumped on the opportunity when I was asked to carry the bill. I wasn't sure at first, but I was like, once I'm in, I'm all the way in. So, so the bill has very unique provisions because it pretty much, the C.R.O.W.N. Act covers everyone. So it covers the apprenticeship, it covers public works, it covers state employees, local employees, county employees. And so this law is really, really a good move for Black African American women or women of color who choose to wear their hair naturally. And part of the bill sets a standard for what is protected hairstyles. And so if you read the bill and you go through the chapters, NERC is the employment agency in which you would file any claim, which is super, super important. So if you don't know how to access NERC, I'm sure Director Jenkins can specifically tell you how to get involved with NERC. They have a website. It's fairly easy to go on and do an online form and allege whatever activity happened to you. And then outside of that, the bill also has very particular provisions around promotion. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up, because although the C.R.O.W.N Act was the fundamental part of the bill, protecting twists, knots, dreads, braids, afro, I inserted provisions in here to deal with vertical promotion. And the reason why this matters is because it becomes effective October 1. And October 1 is going to change the game in terms of vertical promotions at local government level. And so if you focus on section 6, 7, and 23, well, actually 7 and 8 and 23, there are specific provisions around vertical promotions. This portion of the bill touches CCSD. It also touches CCSD on the C.R.O.W.N Act, where they cannot discriminate against students as part of dress code. But even more so, CCSD is dragged into this bill around promotions and local governments to make sure that the promotion process is fair. An individual has their rights to basically receive their test scores and prevent score tampering. And a third party must administer all parts of the written and oral board portion of the test in order to promote fairness. And I wanted to highlight this because the bill has a lot loaded into it. And there are key provisions that on one point is dealing with discrimination. On the other point, it's also dealing with the glass ceiling. And if anybody's ever experienced a glass ceiling, has not been able to promote, this is the bill that's going to change your life. In addition to the portions of the bill, I want you to take note of there's a portion in the back of the bill where the C.R.O.W.N Act, there was a question that came up of whether or not the C.R.O.W.N Act directly applied to charter schools. The answer is yes. University gifted pupils, they're in. Charter schools, if you're a private charter, if you are literally under the statute where you got your legal right to exist from NRS, you're in this bill. And that means as a charter, you cannot discriminate against hair of students. You cannot deny them access to school or kick them out of school because you feel that their braids, their locks, their twists are what you feel is not the established beauty standard for the school. We've already had this bill tested immediately, actually. It happened right when school started. We had one of our legislators' child was actually told that they were going to have to take their hair down because they had braids and they had burgundy ends. And they were told that they were going to have to remove either change their hair color, but the only way to change their hair color was actually to get their braids completely taken out and redone. And they were given a color test. They were shown a color in school to say, you do not have a natural hair color. On the spectrum of hair, your hair is burgundy and it's as close to pink as possible. And that is not a natural hair color. Therefore, you are violating dress code and you need to change your hair. And I was immediately called by the legislator asking, what are the rules? What does C.R.O.W.N Act mean? I contacted Director Jenkins asking her, what do we do from this step? And at the end of the day, the school needed to back down and adjust their policy. And so SB 327 is it's significant because it's going to change how adults and young adults are treated within work environment and school environment. We also have a safety provision in the bill. There were questions asked about, well, what if we already have existing safety protocol? What if, there are things that violate OSHA or et cetera, et cetera? Well, the bill specifically says this. if you have a safety rule, the only way that you can discriminate, the safety rule must fall in line with existing state statute or federal statute. You don't get a chance to go manufacture a rule or policy that steps outside of the boundary of what state law or federal law already states in this space. And so, for example, if somebody comes in with the long dreads, they should not be told to cut their dreads. The policy should allow them to tie their hair up and move it away from their face. We were asked the question for police officers, whether or not, because they have an established grooming standard, that you have to have short hair. And so the question was, now what do those officers have to do if they now come in with dreads? Their hair can be neat, meaning close, but not cut off. You can no longer tell an officer, you have to cut your dreads or your twist off. They can actually wear their hair in the natural state because of SB 327. And I know that changes the game in a paramilitary organization. However, this is now the right. I even had questions from African-American women who were on the civil side at the police, working in the police department, who felt that their natural hairstyle was looked down upon and they felt the need to adjust and change their hair. This bill protects them, and it allows them to wear their natural hair, and it allows them to be free from discrimination. And it actually gives them a legal right to challenge if a person or employer or supervisor challenges their natural hair. And so I will leave it there, Director Jenkins, and that is my rundown of SB 327.
Love it. Thank you so much, Senator Neal. I'm going to kick it over to Professor Green, because Senator Neal talked about a lot of problems that we're seeing with hair, but I don't think a lot of folks understand why hair. Why has hair historically been and remained a proxy for race? How is hair tied into civil rights legislation and now the C.R.O.W.N Act here in Nevada? And can you also, for those who aren't familiar with protective hairstyles, kind of explain what are dreadlocks, what are twists? Why do we have to protect our hair? Can you kind of just in two-part answer those questions, Professor Green?
Sure, not a problem. Thanks again so much for having me this evening. And again, it's been such a pleasure working with you all on this really important piece of legislation that you know is near and dear to my heart as well. So really quickly, I'll answer the second question first, which is with respect to what are protective hairstyles or natural hairstyles. And these are, protective hairstyles, I will have to say, is a relatively new term of art that really denotes, hairstyles that really help to protect one's hair. So for example, protect one's hair from maybe damaging chemical agents or damaging organic agents such as heat, for example, or even water in some instances, and really just tries to ensure that there is less constant manipulation of one's hair texture or hair styles. So oftentimes when we speak to protective hairstyles, it can mean locks like I have here, or faux locks like I have here, or braids, as well as twists, bantu knots. Additionally, in some instances, some individuals may wear wigs or weaves as a form of a protective hairstyle to actually maintain the healthiness of their naturally textured hairstyle or their natural hair. That being said, natural hairstyles too likewise embody or constitute locks, braids, twists, afros, bantu knots, among others. And so essentially what it means is that you're being sort of free from chemical relaxants and allowing your hair to just, form and be manipulated pursuant to its natural hair texture. As it relates to why hair, why hair has been historically and even contemporarily associated with race, it's just like our skin color in large degree, in the sense that when we are trying to classify individuals on the basis of, say, racial or ethnic identity, we oftentimes use skin color or skin complexion as a tool to do that. Similarly, with our hair texture and hairstyles, they likewise have been used to define individuals on the basis of their race, and in turn, turn, our hair texture, like our skin complexion, too plays an important part or essential part of our identity, our racial and cultural identities. And so that being said, in the context of, not just in the American society, but even more broadly, when we think about discrimination on the basis of hair texture, and in particular, natural hair textures that have been associated with African descendants, that has been a source of discrimination, and even historically has been a source, even independent of our skin complexion, the basis of our enslavement, as well as segregation and exclusion and stigmatization in so many different parts of society. And so unfortunately today, it still remains the case that we are being discriminated against systematically on the basis of not only our skin complexion, but also other types of characteristics like our hair texture and our hairstyles that have been racialized.
What hairstyles have been racialized? Can you give us an example?
Oh, well, afros. Afros is number one. Afros have been racialized. It's been associated with Black people or African ancestry, for centuries. Additionally, locks, braids, twists, curly hair, having a tightly curled hair or even more loosely curled hair has oftentimes been associated with Blackness, or at least being a person of color, as opposed to being white or European descendant. So, or it could also even sometimes be racialized as indicia of someone's multiracial ethnicity or multiracial ethnicity or ancestry. So many different types. Additionally, when we think about braids, it's not only just limited to African descendants, but as we know, indigenous peoples likewise have worn braids, continue to wear braids for cultural, religious reasons, and two, have been, and therefore braids likewise have been associated with indigeneity and have been the basis of discrimination.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Green. And let's talk about an incident that I know Naika shared yesterday on our panel yesterday about a form of discrimination. And so now I'm going to turn it over to you, Ms. Naika. Can you tell us about that incident that happened to you when you wore your afro? Because I want everyone to understand, okay, we talk about hair discrimination, how it's perceived, certain hairstyles and textures, but in real world, real life practicality, how did it affect you on that one day you reported to class with your natural hair? So Naika, can you take us through that day?
Of course. So basically it was about or around before 8th grade, the summer before my 8th grade year in middle school. Before that, I had spent years relaxing and straightening my hair because at the time I thought it was ugly to have curly hair due to societal standards. And for a long time, I just didn't want to put up with my hair, or I thought that, I wanted straight hair like all the other girls had. So I would actively straighten and relax my hair. But then during the summer of 8th grade, I was just kind of sick of it. I wanted to love who I was, and I wanted to have my own natural hair and rock it and be able to go to school with an afro, twists and curls and everything. So the summer before 8th grade, I just chopped it all off. Not all of it. I had like a little mini afro on my head. And the curls, they weren't the best, but I still loved them. I felt confident. I felt a part of myself, just very, very happy. So I went to school with my hair like that, of course, and I was so excited and so ready to just show it off and be confident in myself. But then in around like the first week of school, I had come into a new class with this teacher that I've had for the past couple years. And at first, she don't only see me with straightened hair or relaxed hair. So I guess she was taken aback by my afro. And I sat in the back of the class. So I walked in, went to the back. I didn't disrupt her class. I didn't talk out of line. I was always a very quiet student. So I didn't really say anything unless I was answering a question or trying to give my input to the class. And I was always known for being a good student. I was never out of turn, never out of line. So when the teacher called me to her desk in the middle of class, I was kind of shocked. I didn't know the reason why, but the teacher told me that my hair was being a distraction to the class environment. And like I said, I wasn't doing anything wrong at the time, so I was shocked, surprised. I didn't really understand why she would say that. And she told me that I had to go to the principal's office because I was being dress coded for my hair. At the time, I was very scared because I know that being a Black woman in America, having a record can really impact my future. Just showing one detention can really make a difference to what I'm going to, how successful I'm going to be in high school and so on. So just the thought that I was going to be given a dress code or going to have detention because of my hair, it was just such a surreal moment. So I got to the principal's office. I was practically shaking at the time. And I told the lady at the front desk what was happening. And fortunately, she understood my situation. She told me that I wasn't going to be dress coded or getting detention, and that I could choose whether to stay in the office at the time or go back to class. I chose to stay because I was too scared to face my teacher again. And by the time the next period started, that's when I went to class. The next day, I had to go back to her class, so I did. Afro still on my head and everything. I didn't straighten my hair again. I still wanted to feel confident in myself. But I got to that same teacher's class, and they were angry, to say the least. I had gone back to sit in the back again, but the teacher stormed out the classroom saying that she was going to talk to the principal. And in a few minutes, I heard my name being called in the loudspeaker and that I was being called to the principal's office. When I got to the office again, I was shaking. I was so scared because I thought that my future was about to be ruined because of something as simple as my hair. And I would say fortunately, but unfortunately at the same time, the principal was kind of lenient. I wasn't given a suspension, wasn't given detention, nothing like that. But I was banned from wearing my natural hair out or in its state at school. It was either supposed to be in a ponytail or straightened again. That's what the principal had said. So at the same time, I was grateful. I wasn't going to be suspended or have anything on my record. But then again, I was being banned from being myself, being banned from being confident in who I was and loving myself. And that was so detrimental to my self-esteem.
Thank you for sharing that, Naika. Every time you tell the story, it cuts a little bit. So we really appreciate your bravery, but what did you take away from this? Unfortunately, this happened to you, but now how has this shaped your activism today for young students and young girls and young students, young people?
Well, that experience, for a while, I did take it negatively. I didn't really love myself or have very good self-esteem, but I learned to overcome it. And through working to love myself and working to grow my self-esteem, I'm now able to wear my natural hair, wear braids, wear locks, whatever I want. And I can easily say that I love who I am and love my Blackness and my culture. But the way it shaped my activism is that it's really pushed me. It's given me the grit and the strength that I have right now to keep fighting for what I want. Every time I take on a new commitment or a new topic for activism, I can always think in the back of my head of the things that I've had to face due to who I am, due to my culture, my background. And just with those thoughts in mind, I can fight for and push for what I want.
Thank you, Naika. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Juliana. Juliana, what don't people know about textured hair, and what do you believe are the misconceptions? As an educator, tell us how you try to get folks included, or your students or the parents involved, and then I'll kick it over and ask Cedric the same question.
Hello, everybody, and Naika, thank you again for sharing that story. Just like Kara said, yes, that cuts deep. It's heartbreaking when any student can't show up as their full self, and when we as educators impose what we think showing up as yourself looks like. And so that's why this work is so important, showing up to talk about and educating people so that everybody has the space to be authentically themselves. What don't teachers and people at large know about texture hair? Well, I think it's the rich history. I think it's the vast diversity within our ethnicities and our races. I think that who we are is so layered, and it's who we are is essential to who we are as learners. So I always talk about my students as them being storytellers. As a teacher, it's my job to know their stories. And that means I know their families and I know their communities. And just as importantly, I know their history. So I know the history of discrimination against African American and Black communities. And I also know the parallels and the bridges between discrimination for people of color. Being able to understand that history as a teacher helps me understand how I can put a stop to that kind of criminalization in the classroom. I think it's really, really important for teachers to understand that there are policies in schools that criminalize and marginalize intentionally students. We might be following policy unintentionally, but then when it's put in practice, it's quite intentional. And so for me as an educator, it's so important to be really critical of all of these things. And if policies hurt children, hurt families, then we have to do something about it. And so that's why I'm so proud that Nevada is one of the states that is ahead of the curve. It's unfortunate that it's 2021. We should have been doing this since forever, but now is the moment. Now is the moment to talk to families about it. And if we feel that something's maybe controversial or difficult to talk about, then all we have to do is think about students like Naika who've experienced this kind of shame in who they are, instead of being able to focus on what matters most for Naika, which is succeeding and thriving in school. And so in terms of involving families in this, it goes with relationships. And I think that we have to push the conversation about relationships a little bit further. It's not just having relationships with the families and the students you serve, it's having healthy relationships. And in order to do that, we have to build bridges cross-culturally, cross-linguistically, and have anti-racist based relationships. That's the only relationship that can be healthy. And so I hope that stories like Naika's are on their way out, and that teachers understand that if they don't understand, the world is full of resources so that they can understand. It's no longer acceptable to not understand, and that it's our job to welcome absolutely every student with all of their strengths so that they can shine. And along the way, teachers will learn so much from their students.
I love that. Ms. Juliana, what are some of the resources that you would recommend? If you could just kind of post them in the chat, some books, so folks who are, allies or who just really don't know or didn't know that hair was an issue, what are some resources and tools? And I'll also pivot back to Professor Green on any articles that she might be able to share on the chat so that we can be fully informed about how this impacts our youth and future, but how we can become more equipped, because as you said, it's no longer an excuse to not know. And so with that, thank you so much, Ms. Juliana. I'm going to turn it over to you, Cedric. As one of the largest employers in the state, being over at CCSD, what do you recommend employers start doing as a result of the passage of SB 327? And what are you doing to try to now incorporate this new legislation?
So I think Senator Neal kind of covered it. She touched on it, earlier. But if we haven't started yet, we need to start reviewing and updating our policies so that we make sure we're in compliance, right? That's going to be the first thing that everybody needs to do. Secondly, we need to not only educate our staff, but we need to provide them or alert them of what this bill kind of entails, because a lot of times people make mistakes unknowingly. Finally, we need to look at training our staff, but not just training in the traditional sense, not just training them on the requirements of the bill. I think it's going to be critically important to include implicit bias training in whatever training that we do. We talked about it before.
Cedric, I'm going to pause you real quick and just explain for everybody who's out there, who's listening, what is implicit bias?
So just kind of in a nutshell, my perspective, and I think Professor Green probably could answer this question maybe better than I can, but it's that little bias that you have that sits way back in the back of that brain that you don't even know exists. And it only becomes a problem when you allow that bias that you might have that you don't even really recognize, when you allow that bias to kind of seep into decision-making in the workplace or in school. That's when it becomes a huge issue. And we need to understand, how to recognize that so that we don't make those mistakes, so that we don't look at, someone's hair or their culture or their color or race and use our biases that are tucked way back to influence decisions that we make in the school or at work.
Right. And you were touching upon this and I interrupted you. I just wanted everybody to know what implicit bias was. We've all probably experienced it or maybe even harbor some of our own and don't really know it. But that's when we talk about implicit bias, it is that one thing that drives us that we're not really aware of that has impacts to other people because they're different, because we attribute stereotypes to them. So right. Mr. Cole, if a student or concerned parent has an issue around discrimination, where can they find the information about who they should report those concerns to?
So as always, the first step is definitely notifying that school's principal, right? But beyond the principal, all a student or their parent needs to do is go and visit our website, ccsd.net, click on that Notice of Non-Discrimination tab, and there is a list of resources and places where a parent or student can complain. Beyond that, there is what we send out every single year at the beginning of each school year is the Back to School Reporter. That has that same information on, I think it's page 28 of that document. So instead of taking that document and maybe using it, to fill your bird cage or whatever, make sure you read that document because there's a lot of important information in there about how, where, and who to talk to about your complaint. That stuff is very, very important.
Thank you so much, Cedric. Ms. Juliana, recent articles discuss a school librarian cutting a young person's hair without parental consent in another state, not Nevada. The parents have now filed a complaint with the appropriate EEO office, similar to what we would put NERC as. How might we prevent this from happening in Nevada?
Yes. And I think Mr. Cole said this really importantly. It's so important to do this kind of training with all educators, all staff members, to identify reflective practices for who we are as individuals and how we show up in our professional spaces. And I think that my answer is twofold. Firstly, I think that we need to be more comfortable in dispelling an idea of normative, right? That there's a certain normal. I know that in my experience growing up, I thought normal was white, English speaking, and a nuclear family structure. And my whole life, I thought that I was subcategorical, like not normal. And it wasn't until I had agency and advocacy as an adult that I realized that that was so detrimental to my self-vision of how I saw myself reflected in others. And so I think when folks understand that there is no normal, there's a normal to who you are to yourself, but there is no normal, because then we have this dichotomy of good and bad. And that's where that bias comes in, whether it's unconscious or not. So I think that's the first job we have to do.
And what was the second fold? I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just agreeing.
No, it's okay. It's okay. And then the second is this year I'm working on developing this concept of joyous and just education. Right? The joyous is that students have a deep sense of belonging at the school. So that means that they can show up as themselves. So if that means that children want to show up with whatever hairstyle feels the best to them, the most natural to them, and if they want to change it every single day, then we as their teachers are supporting and educating ourselves so that we can build the classrooms where they're, really, really able to do this. And the just part takes a look at the hard history of power within the teaching profession. Teachers have a lot of power, and it's our job to be really reflective and really nurturing with that power. That power has to be harnessed towards cultivating self-love, seeing ourselves as learners, having our students not only be seen, but reflected and respected. And I think that is so important in how they express themselves outwardly so that they can have pride in their racial and ethnic and cultural backgrounds. And that goes for all of our students, but particularly our Black and African American students, because of the high levels of discrimination and lack of understanding and empathy. The truth is that our teaching staff is mostly white. And that's true across the country. Nevada has such pride in our cultural, ethnic, and linguistic diversity. Our teaching force doesn't quite reflect that just yet. And so we're working on it. It's important to have teachers like me who, have been otherized, have been marginalized, but we know how to show up and advocate and see through the experiences like what Naika shared, and be able to guide our students through those things.
I wanted to say we need more teachers like you, Ms. Juliana. And speaking of teachers, and I know Senator Neal is also a professor as well, but I'm going to go to you, Professor Green. You have been doing this work since the inception of C.R.O.W.N. You've informed several states, Nebraska being your most recent since Nevada. Tell us about your why. Why do you do this? You do teach other law students, young minds. You reflect your own experiences in your work. And how do you help train the next generation of young lawyers, aspiring lawyers like Ms. Naika, to really not only show up as themselves, as Ms. Juliana said, but also use that to inform your practice to be a better lawyer, a better administrator, a better senator, a better human being? And we'll circle back to kindness at the end. But Professor Green, tell us what your motivation is and what is your why? Tell us more about you.
Okay, sure. All right. Well, really, it is students like Naika. It is the future generation that is really my why. It's really trying to ensure that there is a better society, a more inclusive and equitable and dignifying society in which they'll live. And as it relates to that, even just for those of us today, I'm hopeful that the work that I'm doing and have been doing for over 15 years now in terms of combating race-based natural hair discrimination, as well as other forms of racial discrimination, will not only positively change and transform the society as well as the law for future generations, but hopefully that we will likewise be able to benefit from it before we go to maybe greater glory, if you will. And so that is my why. In terms of my role as a law professor, it really is my primary goal is to help my law students to be more culturally competent lawyers, to be able to really understand and appreciate all of the various experiences of people of color. Back to what Juliana is talking about in terms of deconstructing some of these these normative ideas in law, and to that point, really just trying to ensure that our laws, our policies, and practices, again, are more inclusive and equitable, and really reflect the difference and the diversity that is in our society.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And Senator Neal, if you could advise any individual or entity, which was the focus of your bill, who may be struggling with implementation in work, in school, what would your advice be, other than telling them to file with NERC, which they certainly can, and we appreciate that shout out in the bill. But what would your advice be?
So if an employer or supervisor is struggling with the implementation, I would want to ask why, right? I know that when we pass this bill, a lot of people ask, why is this necessary? Why is this needed? Why do African Americans or people of color get this particular protection and no one else? And what I would say to them is that racial isolation is real, and so is discrimination, and that you can isolate a person and cause pain by discriminating on a person's hair because their hair is attached to their identity. And because it's attached to their identity, you can directly affect their ability to perform and be productive for you when you have created an environment where they don't feel safe, they don't feel like they can be whole, that they can give the full parts of themselves to their work. Because now they're coming in having a stigma and feeling like all eyes are on their hair versus their personality, versus their work ethic, and versus their ability to actually perform the job. And I think all of the panelists have said it, that we have created cultural norms that say straight hair is what you're supposed to have in order to be accepted and liked. And as African Americans, we're saying, if my hair grows out at 3B or 4B with kinks or with squiggles or waves or super tight coil that you cannot undo, I need that to be respected, because it literally is a tight coil. And the only way for me to actually wear that hair is for me to leave it alone.
Yeah, that part, leave it alone. And, so why does C.R.O.W.N matter? What is it? Why does it matter to you? I'm going to ask everybody in the panel, why does C.R.O.W.N mean so much in your own words?
So it means something to me because we set a standard for the state on how we are going to view ancestry and people of color and how we're going to treat them in the workplace and within educational environments. Immediately after the bill passed, one of a top lawyer in one of the educational institutions got braids. She hadn't had braids in 30 years, but she felt that now the bill protected her in being able to wear that hairstyle and not be told, aren't you supposed to be like the top chief attorney for our organization, and now you're showing up in braids, and the whole idea of the unprofessional comment was completely squashed. And that's why it's important.
Anyone else want to take it? Okay, we'll go Professor Green, Cedric, Naika, and then Ms. Juliana.
Sure. So it goes back to exactly what Senator Neal is talking about in terms of why the C.R.O.W.N Act is important. Is it allows people to be free to be themselves, to be their most authentic selves, to be able to express very fundamental parts of their identity. And going back to the earlier question, too, relatedly, is that for me, the work that I've been doing over the past 15 years really has resulted in my own movement, the hashtag Free the Hair movement, so that people can rock their natural hair freely and freely rock their hair as you know, however they so choose. And that ultimately what we're doing in this is not only affording these levels, greater levels of freedom to be ourselves, but at the same time, we're also dismantling these biases, these stereotypes, a hierarchy, a racial hierarchy, a color hierarchy on the basis of our hair textures, very much to what Juliana and others have already talked about in terms of the privileging of straight hair that has been racialized as well as being associated with European ancestry or whiteness, and denigrating hair textures that have been associated with African ancestry or being a person of color. And so this work is so important because not only does it afford greater levels of freedom and agency and autonomy for us all, but it also helps to dismantle a long-standing, centuries-long racial hierarchy as it relates, and color hierarchy as it relates to hair textures and hairstyles. And so ultimately that everybody can appreciate and respect that all hair is good hair.
I love it. And it breeds inclusivity.
Yep.
Right?
Agreed.
Right. Cedric, what does C.R.O.W.N mean to you?
So for me, I think I'm going to start by giving my wife a shout out. My wife wears her natural crown, right? So for me, it means grace, beauty, and professionalism, right? Her wearing her natural crown does not take away from any of those things. It doesn't take away from her beauty, her grace, and it does not take away from her professionalism at work. She's able to go to work and do her job with her natural crown and do it well. So again, let me give the wife a shout out for wearing her natural crown and being as beautiful and graceful as she is.
A lot of plus points for you tonight, Mr. Cole.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of plus points, yeah. And Ms. Naika, tell us, what does it mean for you, especially after what you've been through? But what would you also too want your classmates to know about your natural hair?
Well, first off, it means so much. Like Professor Wendy Green said, not only is it dismantling a hierarchy or a racial hierarchy that's been implemented for decades, but also it's so personal to me to know that there are students in my state now that won't have to deal with what I had to deal with. And to also know that I have sisters who go to school right now, and to know that they are protected, that they won't have to be scared by teachers like I am, that they can rock their natural hair and be proud of it at school. That means so much to me. To know that I have friends who won't have to deal with it, to know that the people that I care for are now protected by this law, and that really resonates with me and makes me so proud of this right now.
Thank you so much, Naika. And then Ms. Juliana?
You know, C.R.O.W.N to me means that we are making headway in establishing our values as a state. Right now, across the country, there has been a lot of anti-racism. And it's really disheartening to see that kind of work, because what we want is to be honest about the history of discrimination and purposeful marginalization that people in this country, particularly people of color, have faced. What better way to heal than to start it in school? You know, I think about my colleagues and friends who also, you know, have really layered and complicated processes with wearing their natural and textured hair. And I think about the power of in schools, we would have celebrated their hair just as they wanted to wear their hair, that maybe by the time they got to the workforce, it wouldn't take a law for you to wear your hair the way you've always wanted to wear your hair. And so I think in schools, it is setting the bar high that we are a state that not only values our diversity, but is committed to making sure all of our students are reflected and respected in the policies we put in place. We're acknowledging the power of policies, right?
Yes,
and that
yes.
is so powerful. And I'm super excited and really grateful for the advocacy of this panel to make this happen.
I'm so glad too. And, you know, I wanted to ask Senator Neal, you know, why does kindness matter in all of this? We also did get a question too, where a great friend of mine, City of Henderson, I know her very well. She said, you know, all respect, she's definitely an ally. She doesn't want to offend anyone, but does this apply to white people with textured hair? So can we address that, Senator Neal? And then also, why does kindness matter, especially when we're talking about inclusivity?
I think the texture question is a Dr. Green question. I'm going to put that all the way to her.
Okay.
But I'll address the kindness matters. So I think growing up, and I'm just going to reach back. Growing up, I think as an African-American female, hair has been one of the most critical points and places of criticism, not actually interracially and outside of our own race. And kindness matters because it is a part of our identity, and you can literally ruin someone's day. And I remember being 12 and I got my first perm, and I thought, okay, we're going to do the whole Farrah Fawcett thing. And then it rained and it was a wrap. And and the first comment was, your hair is so ugly, not straight. But once I got to the point where I accepted all of this, I felt number one, I felt beautiful. I felt attractive because I didn't have to tweak my hair. I didn't have to spend thousands of dollars on a relaxer. I didn't have to spend thousands of dollars trying to figure out what was the best hot comb.
Let me just stop you right there, because there might be some people who don't understand what you mean by that. So, you know, I'm going to go ahead and push it over to Professor Green. When we talk about the maintenance of hair care and the economic costs to folks to try to conform their hair so that they can get the promotion, they can be accepted, they can be in the inner circle, they can be in the boardroom, they can be respected as intellects, despite their hair, what is the economic cost to Black and brown women? And then I want to talk about accents too. So we'll pivot. So Wendy.
Sure. Okay. No, absolutely. I know that story very well, Senator Neal. I can attest. That's been me too. Definitely, as it relates to getting the hair straightened using a hot comb, which is that comb that you would put on top of a stove that can get to 400 and 500 degrees Fahrenheit and can potentially burn your scalp and your ears and other things if it drops on you. So that is a staple in Black households, I'll tell you. And so been there, done that, and not trying to go back. But because that too can be, for some people, a traumatic experience, despite maybe sometimes the positive outcomes. With that being said, in terms of the economic costs, they are enormous. Black women, it's been reported that we spend twice as much money. We spend in the millions, if not billions of dollars as it relates to hair care, hair products, and hair styling. Additionally, Black women spend more time, reportedly, than more time than white women in terms of professional hair styling. That costs money too. If anybody even knows, I don't even know too much anymore, but if if you're going to get a chemical relaxer to maintain a straightened hairstyle, that could go upwards of $75, $100, $150, or sometimes even more for every visit, for every 4 to 6 weeks, possibly 8 weeks. And then you also have to maintain that hairstyle in between times. So you can add that up over the course of a year, right? Additionally, we spend as Senator Neal alluded to, is like if the hairstyle gets messed up by whether it be the rain or if we decide to exercise and do other things of that nature that then kind of mess up the straightness and then allows the curliness and the coiliness and the kinkiness to come back, then we're going back to the hair salon to straighten our hair. And so to that point, many Black women and women of color actually disengage in physical activities and exercise in order to maintain straightened hair. So it not only has an economic cost and can negatively impact our economic well-being, but it also has a cost in terms of our physical health as well. And so there are also other things as it relates to the physiological health, as well as we've already mentioned, the emotional health consequences in terms of having to conform to straight hair expectations or mandates in our workplaces, schools, and throughout broader society. So what I always say is that if you care about Black women and girls' health, then you have to care about our hair.
That's really important too. And so I'm going to kind of pivot to accents, and then we actually have our very first question that I'm going to get to. And that's, I had a conversation with a really good friend colleague. We did Spanish radio, and shout out to all my fabulous Latinx peeps and Hispanic Heritage Month celebratory folks. That's all of us really. So shout out to all my peeps. But one of the things that was really, and Senator Neal, we got this question. It's like, when are you going to do a bill on accents? This is great about the crown, but what about accents? Because I find, and I said, hey, this is actually giving more teeth to the agency, because don't a lot of people who have curly and textured hair also have an accent? So when we really looked at this bill, it looks like you all made provisions for that, right? So Wendy, do you want to talk about that too?
Sure. Yeah. So I think I also mentioned this in the chat as well. The definition of race that is in Nevada's Crown Act, which is really quite important because there are other or similar types of Crown Acts that define race as traits historically associated with race. What we've done here is actually take out historically so that it can be even more inclusive, right? That it can cover discrimination on the basis of accents, on the basis of language, on the basis of maybe cultural attire, on the basis of other types of characteristics, even beyond hair texture, hairstyle, and skin color that have been associated with race, and then animates various forms of racial discrimination or harassment or hostile work environments or other forms of marginalization and subordination in the workplaces and schools. So it was really quite critical. And just a shout out again to Senator Neal for that, for at least allowing me to kind of push that a little bit. And then ultimately it was accepted in the legislation so that it can actually be more expansive and inclusive and really reflects the diversity, the cultural and racial diversity of Nevada and just, American society more generally.
Right. I think that's great, Professor Green, because we also talk about how, and there are questions, does this only apply to persons of color, Black people?
Right. Right. So I thank you for reminding me of that question. No, it does not. So that is the one thing about
everybody gets the love.
Exactly.
Talk about that, Professor Green.
Sure. So even though this bill is very much focused on people of color and on African descendants in particular, trying to address this systemic form of racial discrimination on the basis of our natural hair texture and hairstyles, like all of our civil rights statutes, generally speaking in U.S. history, is that even though it's centered very much on African Americans' experiences, it ends up protecting everybody. And so all of our civil rights laws, when it comes to racial discrimination, as well as other forms of discrimination, it's not based on your racial identity as it relates to whether or not you're protected. It's about what the covered entity has done. Have they engaged in racial discrimination? And if they have, then yes, you are covered, and your racial or ethnic identity should not be a barrier to your getting your discrimination claim redressed.
Perfect. And facial hair, just so we're clear, facial hair,
Sure. So facial hair, I also mentioned this in the chat. Even though the C.R.O.W.N Act does not expressly mention facial hair or the regulation of facial hair in schools and in workplaces, I know you're aware of, is that these grooming policies that regulate facial hair can implicate a number of protected classifications like race. For example, African-American men oftentimes are suffering from PFB or PBF. I might have gotten that confused in my mind, but nonetheless, it is a condition that if you're closely shaving, that it can result in a really severe pain and shaving bumps that can be quite traumatic and quite painful. And so there have been cases where African-American men have been able to successfully challenge no facial hair policies in light of this particular condition. And not to get too much in the legalese, but under various theories of discrimination on the basis of race. So that's one example. Additionally, when we think about facial hair, it could also potentially implicate religious discrimination too, because we have individuals who wear facial hair in observance of their particular religious beliefs. We've even had cases involving African-American men and facial hair that have implicated our discrimination laws against disability discrimination. So it runs it can be lots of different types of claims, but nonetheless, I say all that to say is that these types of regulations can potentially not only implicate the C.R.O.W.N Act or racial discrimination, but it can implicate other forms of discrimination that are made unlawful under Nevada's anti-discrimination law.
And we're protected. So I'm going to address a question that popped up in the chat. I'm going to redact a little bit, but this comes from someone who is asking, I want to send in a complaint on 2 supervisors at my workplace. They asked me where I got my hair from when I was wearing a wig. This happened in Nevada. I didn't respond because I didn't know how. And then the other supervisor stated, I grew it out of my head, which I didn't because I'm suffering from alopecia. I was hurt and I still am. This happened in August. The bill doesn't take effect until October, right? And so, we are going to answer that in one second, but we do have a special guest who I would like Cedric to just give a welcome to and to welcome and congratulate Ms. Juliana. We have Superintendent Jesus Jara on there.
Thank you, Kara. Superintendent Jara, who is very much in support of the bill, has joined the meeting. He is running from one meeting to another. So he just wanted to pop in and say hi to everybody. So without further ado, Superintendent Jara, you are on, sir. Oh, you're on mute.
You know what? Somebody had to do it, right? It's been 20 months and I haven't figured out this mute button. Well, first of all, Cedric, thank you, Ms. Jenkins. I really appreciate giving me this few minutes and the opportunity, and the entire Nevada Equal Rights Commission for hosting this this C.R.O.W.N forum. And obviously, as my good friend who's here, Senator Neal, and also Senator Harris, who have really been advocates and really pushing and really understanding with the importance of SB 327. So this is critical because we, really the work that we're doing, and I can't thank Mr. Cole for his commitment to really giving every single employee in this school district a voice and representing within our community. Juliana, who is, I don't need to say anything else about Juliana, but really both of these wonderful employees represent what we're all about, and not because of the color of their skin or where they come from, but really what they speak, what they think, not only for our employees, but for our children. We have, as a district, have taken on some measure steps to really make sure that every child's voice is counted and every employee feels comfortable. Are we perfect? I can tell you, absolutely not. But it's not because of lack of trying. We need to continue to please share with us where they're being, spoken out of turn and a lot of different things that I don't tolerate as a superintendent. Everybody needs to feel really safe to come to work, and our children need to feel safe to learn. If we can't do that and speak our mind, our thinking, and what we believe, then what do we have as a school district and as a country? So I just want to say you have my full commitment. Anything you need, you can count on us. This is most of, I would tell you, most of the difficult times in this nation, in this country, in this community. And we have to always stand up and do what's right for every single child and all our students. So just thank you for the work you're doing. I know it's not easy, but it's so valuable.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Cedric. And Juliana, great question to the secretary. See you later, Senator Neal.
So Senator Neal, I'm going to kick it to you with that question. What can this young lady do about her situation at work? She has alopecia and she's getting comments about her protective style, her wig. Can she file now?
Thanks. Thank you. So first and foremost, the C.R.O.W.N Act became effective upon passage and approval. What's effective on October 1st are Section 7, 8, and 23 relating to the promotion piece. That's the one that's coming up. But I think there are two parts to that, right? The fact that she has alopecia, which means there's a health-related concern that's underlying why she's wearing the wig. And that, I think that's the first issue that's up, is what is the policy around, because it could be the same situation if she was a cancer patient and she had been going through chemo and she lost her hair. So number one, it's inappropriate. I know that there are still safeguards in place, like if you have cancer and you're able to wear a wig, or same thing if you have alopecia, right? Because we got a huge national lesson from one of our congresswomen who finally decided she would get rid of all of her wigs and wear her natural hair because of alopecia. And I think that if the intent was to discriminate, embarrass, ridicule her, I think that it's worth getting into and finding out like what it was the intent behind the comments made to her, and what are their policies, number one, around wigs, because they should have had an updated policy. And
right. And so one of the things I think everybody should be reminded is that if you have or encounter discrimination, or what you think is discrimination, you need to report it to your supervisor. If you don't trust your supervisor, go to Human Resources, and always look to your employee policy, your handbook. There should be directions on who you talk to when you feel like you're facing discrimination, whether it's based on race, which now can also be hair related, whether it's based on disability, age, color, religion, accent, national origin, and disability. So those are good places to start. If you cannot get anywhere with your employer, you may file a complaint with the Equal Rights Commission. And I know I'm playing moderator now, but I felt it was a really good point in time to insert how that process works, because the state will try to help facilitate a settlement through mediation to the extent that we can. If we cannot, we will prepare you for litigation. Okay. And so now we haven't heard from you in a little bit, and I want you to tell me two things that you love so much about your natural hair and what you want folks to know about your natural hair. Two things you love about your natural hair.
Oh, only two? Okay, wait, I gotta
Go
think
for
about
five.
this.
Go for
Geez.
10.
Okay, so let's see. It's versatile. I absolutely love the amount of things I can do with my hair. Put it in braids, twists, bantu knots, locks, literally anything I can think of. If I'm feeling a little elegant that day, I might have it in a blowout. If I'm feeling any
like
emotion.
Jenkins. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It can literally do anything and go with any of my emotions. I love how beautiful it is. It's just sometimes, even though I might get frustrated with it because it takes a lot of time to do, just looking at my natural curls, like the way that they naturally move, it's beautiful. It's something that I don't see every day from everyone, and having that unique curl pattern, that unique strand of hair, knowing that my curl pattern is different from everybody else's, something that I love to just notice about myself. I love the strength that my natural hair gives me, because I swear it takes a lot of strength to have natural hair. Even in not just physically, because I swear my arms are toned because of the amount of times I have to hold my hand up to do my hair, but the mental strength, because taking that amount of time, that patience to do it, I'm the most patient person my friends will meet because of my hair. And I'll just leave it to that so that I don't take too much time, but I absolutely love everything about my hair.
Well, I
And
want to follow up with that, because I mean, I'm sure your friends are very amazing, just like you, but why is kindness so important?
I would say that kindness is so important because of the effects that it has. It's very cliche to say that, you know, a great world runs on kindness, but it's very true, because one act of kindness can lead a person to having an amazing day, which leads them to treating other people with kindness, which leads that, you know, it's a whole snowball effect. But if you treat someone without kindness, with hate, that could really implement or affect their lives. For example, how I was treated with hate instead of kindness, that led me to really disregarding who I was, disregarding my culture. I felt a lot of hate for myself, and my self-esteem was low. If only my teacher had decided that day to just treat me with kindness, then I would have spent my 8th grade year with my natural hair, rocking that afro, loving who I was. Instead, it took me a whole other year to finally learn self-love. It was a detrimental effect, because all she has to do is treat me with kindness, and instead chose hate. So every single day, choose kindness so that someone, a little kid like me, won't be affected by some terrible actions.
Thank you, Naika. Juliana, why is kindness important?
You know, I think kindness is tied to belonging, and I think belonging is the most important ingredient, and belonging without having to dim any part of yourself. I loved the congruency and the bridge to our accents. It's almost like we have to acknowledge that sometimes there's a gate, and in order to get through that gate, you have to assimilate, you have to comply. Kindness to me means that we're building spaces based on collaboration, right? That our students have voice, they're co-constructing their spaces, and that they can come as is, that we don't have to have them negotiate their identity and their self-love to belong. And so kindness to me is an act of social justice. It's an act of saying it's more. Yes, it's kindness, and it's more than kindness. It's doing what is right, what is inclusive, what's going to bring the most people with you, with everybody moving forward together. And so I'm just so taken back, Naika, by you're mature beyond your years, that's for sure, and just your advocacy. I think that our best teachers are students. And so while I don't think it's the burden of students to have to teach us where we are wrong, I'm grateful that there's students like Naika really creating the space where other people fit, where everybody fits. Something that's been living in my brain rent free, right? That's what the kids say nowadays, is this quote by Brene Brown that just made everything fall into place. She said that fitting in is the opposite of belonging. So anything that we're doing that asks our students to fit in to something that's not respectful, reflective of who they are, is the opposite of kindness. And so it's okay to learn along the way. I know sometimes my colleagues may feel like, oh my goodness, I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to discriminate against anybody, and I don't know how to move forward. And I think that fear paralyzes a lot of people, because there's a way to move forward, asking questions, learning as we're going, but being accountable for any kind of wrongdoing that we're doing. So like, I hope your teachers have had the opportunity to apologize to you. And if they haven't, it's beautiful that you have grown self-love out of that experience. But the power of apology, right? As a teacher, I apologize to my students all the time. There's so much power in that, because that's being kind. Being reflective and accountable is being kind. And so I think kindness is centered on social justice. And I'm glad that there's so many congruencies between this bill and the kind of schools that we want to build for our students.
especially in Nevada, perfect. And we had a question that was on yesterday's panel. I'm going to bring it up again because I don't see a lot on the Q&A tonight. And that was a situation where we were discussing the young athlete who had his dreadlocks cut right before he was able to compete in a professional, I'm sorry, not professional, but in what in his world would be his own match. So it wasn't professional sports, but it was at the school level and it was important. I believe it was in a tournament. And so Cedric, talk to us about that. You had addressed some really good points on what should have been done instead of this young man having to decide whether or not to cut his locks to enable to perform. And I believe Senator Neal basically chimed in and said that is a problem. So Cedric, talk to us about that. What could be prevented so that doesn't happen here, where we talk about not only our students having a space to learn, but also play sports and compete?
Sorry about that. I think Superintendent Jar might have jinxed me. But that situation was kind of unique because it happened in the moment, as I understand it. So there wasn't a lot of time for a decision or to be made. It happened in the moment, and had that student or that wrestler not complied, he may not have been able to continue competing. But I think before that happens, I think it's going to be really important for us collectively to educate parents on their rights, where to go for help, and who they can look to advocate on their behalf if they are unsure where to go. A good parent advocate, a good parent mentor helps a lot of times because there are sometimes language barriers. There are cultural barriers that might be in play. And, sometimes there's just plain old fear. And so, parents sometimes need help advocating for their students as well. But they need to be, and maybe we all collectively may need to do a better job of educating parents about who they can go to, how to complain, and how they can get their issues resolved.
I agree, because in that moment, as I understand it, it was kind of just like up to the referee saying, you've got to cut your hair. This young boy was torn because he really wanted to compete, but then he was being made to choose between his hair or his sport. And so I think one of the things that we want to take away is that we don't want that to happen here. It's now illegal to do it. We also had some members from the Boyd School of Law participate on yesterday's panel and said, be careful about cutting hair because that could also be deemed as a battery on a student. And it looks like someone just chimed in and said that this young man, we're talking about the wrestler, he was ambushed. He was peer pressured to cut his hair. And so we don't want that to happen. And now we have a law that basically says it cannot happen, it should not happen. And now you have legal recourse to do it. We're wrapping up here. I don't know if we have any more questions. We still have active participants here tuning in. I want takeaways from everybody. So we'll go around our panel and we'll end it with Ms. Naika, but let's start with Professor Green. What would you like this takeaway to be? What would your last remarks be for tonight's celebration of not only World Afro Day, but the celebration of Nevada being the 12th state to have the C.R.O.W.N Act here?
Sure. So I guess in sum, what I would say is, and I think it just really, this particular quote from one of my sheroes, Polly Murray, who is a civil rights advocate, civil rights lawyer, one of the contemporaries of Justice Thurgood Marshall, and unbeknownst to many, one of the legal architects for the Brown versus Board litigation strategy, which ultimately, as we know, made sure that, or at least attempted to make sure that racial segregation in our public schools would be deemed unconstitutional. And so what I would say, hopefully this conversation really helps to illuminate what she said, which is the business of oppression is not respecting one's personhood. And I'm hopeful that we all take more introspective and reflective steps to not engage in the denial and the extinguishment of one's personhood, and thereby engaging in acts of oppression in our schools, our workplaces, as well as in our personal spaces.
Thank you, Professor Green. Please also feel free in the chat to put your Free the Hair, hashtag Free the Hair movement, and any other resources that our viewers can take a look at and also look at. I think I said look at.
Free the
twice.
hair. That's right. Free
Yeah,
the hair.
free the
Happy
hair.
and happy
Right. We want
World
resources.
Afro Day.
Right. Okay. And so Cedric, takeaways.
So for me, I think the takeaway is, or maybe the comment might be more appropriate. I think, you know, everybody kind of needs to understand that a natural crown does not equal a lack of professionalism in the workplace, nor does it equal inability. So, you know, if an individual has that ability, they should be judged on those merits and not anything doing with their hair. That to me is kind of what's right in the simplest form. So
thank you so much. And you're working on policies.
And we are working on policies as we speak, Senator.
There you go. Because you know that was going to come at you. And our very own National Teacher of the Year, Ms. Juliana, any takeaways?
There are so many takeaways. First is just a cementing of this commitment for equity and being really intentional and holistic about what that means. It's not just a word that we throw around. It means that all of our students experience joy and justice in their learning. And so, you know, I'm really inspired by Dina Simmons. She does terrific work in terms of being able to, you know, balance social and emotional learning with social justice. We can't just tell our students to be resilient against laws that are and policies that are dismissive of their identities, right? We have to be able to do it intentionally. And one of the things that she talks about is how she, as a young child, got to love her learning because she got to go to a school that was not in her neighborhood, that was all about, you know, project-based learning and nurtured her and all of this. But in her neighborhood where she still lived, all the kids hated school and because it was rote, because they were criminalized. But she got to love learning. Nonetheless, in that space, she was marginalized. She was discriminated against. And I think that her story is reflected in so many of us. And so my takeaway is that we can have it all. We can have joyous space where kids love to learn, because ultimately that's the goal, our students to find academic and social and emotional success. And we can have spaces where we begin to right the wrongs of our history and right the wrongs of our public spaces. And so my biggest takeaway is this commitment to making sure that we're elevating the right to be a human, right? And so I encourage all the teachers out there to really think about how you set up the tone in your classroom, how you set up the community in your classroom based on collaboration, not compliance. Because oftentimes we don't have all the tools we know and need to see how we're dimming down our students. And so I invite all of us to move forward with curiosity and not fear, and to really ask the questions that we need to ask to make sure, you know, I ask my students all the time, how do you feel in my classroom? Because if I'm ever hurting you, I want to know so that I can make that right. And so those are my commitments as a teacher, and I hope that there's teachers on the webinar, and I'm always open to this conversation. So you all know where to find me.
Thank you so much. Senator Neal, bill sponsor, takeaways.
So
I know don't do it, but takeaways.
I know, but so my takeaway is, you know, as a policymaker, we get a chance to put sentences and words to someone's life, and that's an extreme power. And it also allows, because we are a diverse legislature, representation matters to determine the public policy impact that's going on. And so listening to this whole conversation, I'm super grateful that, number one, I'm allowed to be in this role. I'm allowed to move legislation that can affect change, and it can move the human conscience clearly, because what I'm hearing is how it affects the emotional side, the identity, And it's because as an African-American woman, I'm allowed to be in the legislature where we can move policy to then affect the lives of individuals. And that's the biggest part for me. I'm grateful, honored that I could even have this legislation to help people.
We're so grateful you did it. And thanks for giving the responsibility to us, because we will do it. We're happy to do it. This is why we are here. And so last but not least, Miss Naika, what are the takeaways?
I'd say the takeaways are, of course, that natural hair is beautiful and that it should be respected and loved and cared for, and that even though that it's amazing that this bill was passed, it should have been something that doesn't need to be passed. We should have all just loved our hair in the first place, but I am so happy that it's a thing, that we're all protected now. But I also want to leave everyone with the message that even though we have provided a lot of great and amazing resources during this webinar, I want everyone to take the time to go out of their comfort zone and learn and educate themselves about this topic. It takes just a few seconds to go online and search up the topic of natural hair, topic of Black culture, and things that have to do with BIPOC children and students. And I would love for everyone to do so, because as it was discussed today, implicit bias is something that is very real, something that does affect our everyday lives, and each individual needs to do the work to not eradicate that implicit bias, because unfortunately it's always going to be there. We always have that little thing in the back of our minds, but to always combat it, to find a way to make sure that our judgment and our actions are based on love and kindness.
Love and kindness. And I just want to say thank you to all my amazing panelists, Juliana, Wendy, Cedric, Senator Neal. Amazing. Naika, thank you so much. What a wonderful topic. We're getting kudos in the chats. I will also shout out Leela Vizcarra. She is my Chief Compliance Investigator, and she also helps me with outreach and training. Leela, can you pop on real quick and wave to everybody? She has been behind the scenes helping moderate questions and making sure our Zoom worked out right. And also the beautiful Christina Ennis, who is an administrative professional at NERC. Hey, everybody, that's a wrap. We did it. Happy World Afro Day. We are the 12th state now to pass C.R.O.W.N. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a beautiful night and just enjoy your hair and be kind.